Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. This is an exciting new current affairs programme that looks at issues affecting Israel and the Middle East. And today I'm focusing on the world's forgotten refugees, the over 600,000 Jewish refugees from Arab lands who were expelled from their countries during the establishment of the State of Israel. And during Israel's war of survival, in its war of independence in 1948, Israel absorbed 600,000 Jewish refugees from the Arab lands. And to discuss this forgotten story, I'm joined today by Lynn Julius, the co-founder of HARIF. Lynn, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much.
And also Michelle Huberman, Michelle Huberman, who's the creative director of HARIF and also a blogger with the Jerusalem Post. Welcome both to the programme.
Thank you.
Lynn, firstly starting off with you, can you tell us and certainly our viewers a little bit more about you and how you got involved in setting up this campaign for the forgotten Jewish refugees?
Well, I come from a family that was actually forced to leave the Middle East. My parents are from Iraq, and they left in 1950 along with 90% of the Jews of that country. So it's an issue that's obviously very close to my heart. And even though I was born in this country, while I was growing up, I was very aware of relatives who were still in Iraq and who weren't able to leave, who were kept as virtual hostages there. And I remember, you know, being very aware of my parents trying to get my aunt and my grandparents out of there, my cousins, writing letters, lobbying politicians. Things got particularly bad in the late 60s. And I remember going on demonstrations, you know, in support of the Jews from Arab countries, still in Arab countries. So it's very much a personal issue for me. I've always, you know, been very aware of it, as I say, but things really took off, I would say, in the last 10 years when lobbying organizations were set up, mainly in America. And I thought we should really bring this campaign here. So we set up conferences, there were websites set up, and the campaign really got organized. And in 2005, my organization, HARIF, was formed. And what we do is we promote the culture and history of Jews from Arab countries, trying to make people aware that Jews actually did exist in Arab countries, because a lot of people think that they all come from Europe. So this is what HARIF is trying to do. And of course there's a political aspect too, which is that Jewish refugees are extremely important to the Middle East, and we believe that they are essential to peace and reconciliation.
And Michelle as well, can you tell the viewers a little bit about your background and how you got involved and why you're so passionate about the cause of the forgotten refugees?
Well, I grew up here. My background is Ashkenaz, it's European, and I don't have the same stories that Lynn's got, but I've always been very aware of these stories. I lived in France in my 20s, and when I went to live there, I heard totally different narratives. I heard people talking about what it was like in North Africa, leaving with suitcases, families who'd been terribly wealthy and had left with absolutely nothing. They'd had everything confiscated. And it was really absolutely shocking to hear it. And not only that, you know, coming back to London, people don't know about these stories, even within our own Jewish community. For most of us, I grew up with a grandfather, my grandparents who came from the East End of London, and their grandparents came from Eastern Europe, from Latvia, from Lithuania, and totally, totally different stories. But really, these are very important stories, even more so today with everything that's going on in the Middle East. It changes every day. And there's so many cries for justice for Palestinians, and it's very important. But there has to be justice for the other refugees as well, the Jewish refugees, because they lost too. There has to be a balance. They have to be brought into the picture, and I feel very strongly about it.
I mean, we have got a video clip which we'll show that really does bring this whole issue into the light, really. But I mean, one thing, I mean, it's 63 years now since the establishment of the State of Israel. And there isn't really much a day goes by when we don't hear the other side, particularly the Palestinian side, the Arab lobby, continually talking about the plight of the Palestinian refugees after Israel's War of Independence in 1948. And yet we hear absolutely nothing in the media, nothing from our politicians about the plight of the forgotten Jewish refugees. Both of you, why is this the case?
There are lots of reasons why. The Arab side obviously had a vested interest in not telling the truth about the Jewish refugees. They've been in a state of denial. When the issue is raised, they say the Jews left Arab countries of their own free will, or they were forced out by the Zionists, or they came to Israel as Zionists and not as refugees. That's when they actually admit that Jews lived amongst them. You know, because often the stereotype is that Jews are colonialists from Europe, and that they only came to Israel really because Europe allowed them to settle Israel because of the Holocaust, basically, and the Arabs had to pay the price for the European Holocaust. So that's one reason why we don't hear it, because the sheer power of Arab propaganda will not mention Jewish refugees, obviously. But we've also had another problem, and that's that the Israeli government hasn't made an issue of Jewish refugees. Up until very recently, very little was heard from about Jewish refugees. But we hope that that's changing now.
Plus, one of the things is the State of Israel resettled them. They arrived, they had very rough years. You know, they were in camps, but they got resettled. Whereas what's happened with the Palestinian refugees is they fled, they went to Syria, to Lebanon, and they stayed in camps. You know, they haven't got citizenship in those countries. They haven't got work permits. They're just staying there. And there's all of these oil-rich Arab states all around, and they leave them there. I mean, you know, this country is fantastic. We have refugees come in, and they get resettled, they get housed, they get jobs, whether people agree, whether they don't agree, whatever. The fact is, that happens. We don't leave people lingering, and it's totally inhumane of those countries just to leave the Palestinians lingering. You know, when we see these pictures with the Palestinians, they're left there. All this money is given to them, and they're left there. These countries, you know, they're not resettling them. They're not giving them citizenship. It's shocking. It's absolutely shocking.
I mean, also, just reading one of your excellent articles, it's recognising the Jewish Nekba, I think it was in the Guardian comment, where you quote that in today's Middle East, there is 99.5% of the Jews that lived in the Arab world are no longer there. All but remaining is something like 4,500. And you also quote the Jewish historian Nathan Weinstock, who's observed that not even the Jews of Germany in 1939 had been so thoroughly ethnically cleansed. It does really raise the question, raises the issue as why is this an issue that just hasn't been discussed for so long. So I'm so grateful for you too for coming on to explain this to us now. And we now have a clip that we'll go to that will put in historical context the plight of the Jewish refugees from the Arab lands.
I didn't want to think about all what happened, so I just buried my past.
There were 38,000 Jews living in the northern part of Libya at the time. Today, there are none left, Mafdal had. The community is totally extinct.
If somebody wants to understand what is going on in the Middle East, they have to understand the Jewish refugees from Arab countries.
I was in Los Angeles on a business trip. I was in a hotel, and there was a young lady in her mid-20s, and I could tell from her name and from her looks that she was Egyptian. So I said, "Ahlan wa sahlan." He said, "Oh, do you speak Arabic?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "Why did you leave Egypt?" I said, "Well, I'm Jewish." He said, "Oh, I didn't know that there were Jews living in Egypt." And I told her the whole story, and she was shocked.
Everybody already thinks of Jews as white Europeans. Not all Jews are European. When I sing traditional Middle Eastern and North African Jewish music, people will often say to me, "It sounds Arabic." And I say to them, you know, we're not called cousins for no reason. What is Middle Eastern North African has come to be known as Arab. And people forget that there are many other indigenous peoples from the region, and the Jews are one of them.
The Jews were about 2,600 years in Iraq, and when they came to Iraq, they came before the Arabs, before the Muslims, of course.
My family is among the Jews who stayed on that land for the next 2,600 years until they were kicked out around 1950 by the Iraqi government. Jews who stayed in the region are known as Mizrahim, which in Hebrew means Easterners. They either stayed on that land of Babylon, as my family did, or they migrated to lands throughout the region, whether it was Iran, whether it was Syria, Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and so on, the entire region.